I just start with some introductions. I'm Lisa Kaliza. I'm the CBME lead with Postgrad Office. And we can just go around, maybe our presenters, Lori.
Oh, hi. I'm Lori Whitehead. I'm the program director for internal medicine and one of the facilitators today.
Hi, my name is Shom Mukherjee. I'm a medical oncologist. I work at the Jurgenski Cancer Center. I just finished up about a 9-year term as program director within medical oncology, and now just happy to be involved still.
Wonderful.
Has everyone seen the agenda? So, well, I can just briefly talk about that. So we're going to just start with a brief introduction from myself, looking at assessment mapping as a topic and what we want to accomplish today. And then Dr. Mukherjee is going to talk about, he's going to review some of the assessment tools and the O score. And from there, I'm going to present 4 maps that I feel are sort of the basis for curriculum mapping. And then we're going to have either break depending on the time, or we might hear from some of you who from pediatrics who, if Andrea is able to come, about what she's accomplished so far with her mapping. And then we'll go into breakout, splitting into 2 groups, looking at where you're at. And there's some fillable forms I'm trying to get you started on the process. So that's sort of where we're at. Next slide, please. So this is the second of the mapping workshop, the first one being in November. And at the first one in November, we focused mostly on curriculum mapping without the assessment tools. We looked at some of the fundamentals, like why you do a map, and how it's set up and that sort of thing. But just sort of as a review for that, when you're doing a map, some of the general principles, very high level general principles, you have to sort of determine what is it that you want to include, what's important in the map. And not only that, but who is your audience? Who's your target audience? Because you want each map to have a meaning and to provide direction for certain stakeholder groups, whether that's the Royal College, who's going to say yes to your accreditation, whether it's the resident himself, whether it's a PGY1 cohort, whether it's the back office at the residency program. You need to look at that. These are lessons that we've learned in going through this over the past few years. And believe me, we've made many changes along the way to accommodate some of these principles. Each map should probably be labeled, because what you get your head into it and it's so obvious to you what the map's for, but when someone else picks it up, they often don't know what is it, what's the function of it, and who does it really pertain to. So I've now gotten the habit of trying to label the maps so that that's right on it, so that people can use it to its full extent. It's a process that's not static at all. So it's just review, update, refine, change, then start all over again. And what you need to do as well is make sure that those maps that are updated are are in a place where the relevant stakeholders can have full access to it. Whether that's on sorry, I have a cat issue. I thought it was gone, but I may have to get rid of it in a minute. So, just to make sure that those documents are fresh and are available to everyone to see. And you'll find that each program needs to be a little bit different in how they approach the maps. And you'll probably choose a few that are fundamental for your program, but there's often backup maps that you have that are sort of for your own reference to keep you on track. So that's sort of the principles of mapping. But what we're trying to do today is to look at how now we want to sort of add in to the basic fundamental map, the assessment tools to sort of complete the whole picture. And I know that may be going a little bit farther ahead for some of you guys if you haven't started with your basic maps, but I think it's important at this point to illustrate the importance of putting assessment in. So when you look at the assessment mapping piece of it, it's really making sure that your learning outcomes of your program are met and looking at how you're measuring them. And you want to have like a balance of tools that are unique to your program that provide, assessment of the learning outcomes for both formative and summative things. And you want to look at the timelines of the matter. For example, if you have a coach meeting and a competence committee meeting coming up, you want to make sure that the proper rotations are in place and the assessment tools are input along with those rotations or those learning experiences, and that you've called back those assessment tools so that they're available for the coach and the competence committee to look at. You also want to make sure there's a balance so that you don't have like the same tool all through. You don't want to use Form 1, Form 1, Form 1, Form 1. I mean, Form 1 works really well for many things, and ITERs. They work very well, but you want to make sure that you're not using the same tools all the time, because they don't all answer the needs of every type of learning experience. And at the same time, you want to make sure that all of your learning outcomes that are appropriate are being assessed. And one thing that we learned is not all learning experiences need to be assessed. For example, academic half-day lectures, you're not evaluating those. When your residents go to a conference, you're not evaluating that, other than maybe attendance or noting it. But the learning outcomes that need to be assessed will be assessed. And so that's why you have to make sure when you look at the whole thing, it's fitting together. Next slide, please. So when I got looking at the theory of this just in the last few weeks, I was a little bit ashamed or embarrassed because I hadn't really thought of things in this way. And this one author, Wiggins, has looked at it in a different way in terms of how do we do assessment mapping. So he proposes that you should start by looking at what the outcomes are. What are the learning outcomes or the desired results? And then work your way back from there. Then you pick the tools based on the evidence for those tools to work. And then you plug in the learning experiences thereafter. But what I've always been doing is being 3, 2, 1. Like I start with a learning experience. What are my rotations that I'm giving my residents? What are the workshops we provide? What exams do I do? All the things that I do to help them with their learning, workshops, retreats, etc. Then I'm in rotations. Then I'm working back to find the tools and then looking at the outcomes after. The Royal College is really wanting us to look at outcomes. And so I think now I'm at the point, especially since I've read this article, of going back and looking at my maps again. Like I said, it's an iterative process to make sure that I am including, I'm capturing the most important, most relevant aspects of what we're supposed to do with assessment and what drives what. Next slide, please. So that's, unless there are any questions, we'll move on to the next presentation, and Sean will look at some of the assessment tools that we have within our portfolio. And so I think, are there any questions or should we move ahead?
Okay, so maybe I'll just get started with a review of assessment tools. And before we transitioned to CBD about 3 years ago, we had the traditional types of assessment. We had ITERs or ITARs. We had mid-rotation and final evaluations. We had multi-source feedback. So we had some of our nurses and social workers and physiotherapists doing evaluations on our residents, mostly around professionalism and some of the soft skills or non-medical expert skills. We had an OSCE, we had a written exam, a multiple choice exam as well. So that was sort of pre-CBD. So, once we transitioned to CBD, there were a whole bunch of other forms and new terminology that we had to sort of get used to and get the residents used to and the faculty used to. And some of them were easily implementable at the beginning, and some of them took some time just to figure out exactly how we'd implement them in our program. But part of what mapping helps you do is it helps you figure out where there might be gaps in assessing certain EPAs. So say, for example, your entire program, when you go through it rotation by rotation and you find out, actually, there's only one rotation in 3 years where I'm actually evaluating EPA 10.3 or EPA 10, then that indicates, well, maybe there's a gap. Maybe there's some additional assessments that need to take place, and maybe some other training experiences need to be added to the curriculum. So I find curriculum mapping really helped me look at our entire program from a bird's eye and really get a better, deeper understanding as to where the gaps are, how we can change our curriculum and make it better, especially as we transition to CBD. I'm just going to share my screen and just go over some of the CBD forms. As well, I'm going to go through some of the other updated forms that other programs have used, and we're going to share all of these resources so that that's the best thing about all of this virtual learning now, is people can see all the forms and we can share them, and hopefully you might even have these. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm going to open up this. Are you guys able to see CBD forms 1 to 4?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm going to just go through this. Hopefully some of you have heard of these forms, CBD forms 1 to 4. I'm just going to sort of try to make this more practical for you so that you'll understand what are the different types of assessment that are out there. The most common one by far is something that we call Form 1. It's your standard EPA evaluation, and it's where you have a resident who's going in to assess a patient, and you're either directly observing them. I'm going to use the example of direct observation. It's just easier to understand. So you're physically going in with that resident for whatever part of the assessment you want to observe and assess them on. So maybe, for example, in our oncology world, the resident will go in and do a history and physical on a new breast cancer patient, come back out, and then the EPA will actually be counseling a patient on the side effects of cancer treatment. So then we'll actually talk to the resident, we'll go back in with the resident, and we'll stay there for about 10 minutes, and we'll watch them review all the side effects of this systemic therapy. And then we give them a score from 1 to 5, and that's called the O score. And I'll go through this in a little bit more detail in a minute. But it's a 5-point scale, and it basically goes to from 0, where you had to do everything because the resident got in the room and basically froze and didn't know the first step of counseling a patient. Or there's all the in-betweens. At the other end, you basically just sat back and watched the resident. You didn't need to say a word. You just observed and provided feedback at the end. But basically, if you weren't there, it wouldn't have made much difference. So that's considered a score of 5 and often a pass. Sometimes if you had to provide minor direction, many programs will consider a 4 and 5 both a pass in terms of that would count as one of their EPA observations that they would have completed and received credit for. If, for example, they got lots of 2s, they would need to keep going and keep getting more and more assessments until they got enough skills, until they expanded their skill set to get 4s and 5s. So this is a direct observation. There are also examples of indirect observation where you didn't necessarily go in and watch the resident, but the resident came out and told you what they told the patient. And I think many programs will lay it out and say, you need, for this EPA, you need 5 direct observations and 3 indirect observations. So every program is different, but that's Form 1, and this is the most common type of form that you'll see. So that's the overall score, and then it breaks it down into the individual components of the milestones that are associated with the EPA. And it's a 3-point scale, you know, but ultimately there's a 5-point scale, and then there's an opportunity for some written feedback. The next one is often more for surgical specialties, but not necessarily. The example here that they've used is ECMO, which is not something that I do, but basically it's procedural competency. So maybe you're going to do a thoracentesis or a paracentesis or you know, cataract surgery or who knows what. But there's some sort of procedure and you're observing that resident. And again, it's a scale of 1 to 5. And they've created a different form for this, especially for the surgical and procedural specialties. Form 3 is multi-source feedback. And this often is helpful for determining some of the skills like professionalism, you know, communication, collaboration from other healthcare providers aside from physicians. One of the things I want to bring to your attention is that right now on MedSIS, this form is not anonymous. So both the resident and the evaluators and the program directors and the basically anyone who can get access to that resident's file will be able to see the multi-source feedback and the evaluator's name. I think there is a plan to move towards an anonymized multi-source feedback, which would be ideal. Form 4 is narrative observation, and it's just where you observed a resident doing something and you have some verbal feedback, or maybe it's a bit more informal. You really wanted to to have something on that resident's file about some tremendous performance of something they did, maybe not immediately inside the program, but just something that they did that was above and beyond. Maybe, for example, taking an extra call shift from a resident who was ill. So often program directors get a lot of emails and communication about residents who are on one extreme or the other. And so that's a place where a faculty member could go in and put some comments. So those are the main 4 forms, and we're going to use terminology like form 1, 2, 3, 4 throughout some of the examples we'll show you, including the year at a glance, etc. But here's an example of some other evaluations. There's a lot of discussion about, should we get rid of ITERs? Should we keep ITERs? I think most programs are keeping the ITERs, and in general, when you're first starting CBD, I think the general recommendation is that it's probably wise to keep the ITERs until you get a sense of how everything's going to work with CBD. But many programs have amended their ITERs because they don't need to be as detailed and as lengthy. Here's one example. So general surgery has basically had a strengths, areas of improvement or weaknesses, and additional comments. So basically just some written comments. That would be the new end of rotation assessment. So very brief. So with all the new assessments that faculty are doing on the spot, brief assessments, that was one example of a program that decided to really shorten those global end of rotation assessments. Here's another one for from nephrology, PGY4, and this is a shortened or modified ITER. And you'll see medical expert is really only 3 categories and 1 question for communicator, collaborator, leader, health advocate, professional, a much shorter form, and then just the usual questions at the end. So a 2-page ITER. This is similar to Form 3, an expanded Form 3. So although the Royal College has some examples of Form 3s that you can use for multi-source feedback, and we certainly have one with MedSIS, you can modify it, you can change it. And here's an example of a multi-source feedback form. You can see it talks about communication, collaboration, compassion, and professionalism. And I think these are very important forms. And I think over the next few years, we're probably going to become better at making these part of all the programs, because right now there are challenges in terms of making this work practically. I really like this next form. It's called the CBME Resident Reflection Form. I don't know which program this came from, but it basically has a resident think about how they're doing before their assessment at the competence committee level. So often the way it works is that before a competence committee meeting, the academic coach for a particular resident will meet with that resident and ask them how they're doing. They'll go through their EPAs, they'll look at whether they're on track or not, where they need to focus their learning on. And so this is a resident reflection where before the meeting with the academic coach, the resident will fill out this form where they say, am I on target to achieving my EPAs in this stage? What sort of assessments have I done? Goals of care, personal learning needs. What am I doing well? Any barriers to assessment? There's a spot in here for scores of their medical knowledge, which is a constant reminder about where they need to read around, or maybe they need to read up on certain things. And then scholarly activities, what research are they working on? This will be an incredibly helpful document for the academic coach, who would then complete a similar form, often referring to the form that the resident completed, and basically doing a similar thing, but providing a more objective summary of that resident's learning, and ultimately a recommendation that they would put forward to the competence committee, who would then take that information, make a decision about whether they stay in that stage of training or progress to the next stage, and and then ultimately go to the residency program committee for approval. So just to summarize, those are forms 1 to 4 that we've included here, and those are going to be the most common forms we'll talk about. But that doesn't mean that there aren't lots of other assessments like OSCEs, multiple choice questions, examinations, written examinations. And Laura's going to talk a lot more about other assessments. We just have the O-score document here, which is just a bit easier to see. So it goes, it's a 5-point scale. And it goes from I had to do myself, where the physician had to perform the activity entirely themselves and the resident really just observed, all the way to the staff was just observing and the resident did everything. And then you've got all the different examples in between. And this is sort of more kind of common language about how to think about what kind of score to give a resident. And this is just the descriptor. So with that, I'll see if there's any questions about some of the assessment forms, and I'll open it up to the group. And then if there are questions, great. Happy to take them. And if not, then I'll pass it back to Lori to go through the other types of maps that we have. I'll hand it back to you, Lori. I'll just stop sharing here.
And
And I think there was a question in the chat, maybe for
Oh,
Dr.
sorry.
Mukherjee.
Yep. Let me just read that here.
let's see.
Are any of the other forms available as templates to adopt? Absolutely. I'm going to let Lisa and Allison answer that question about how these other programs can get access to these forms and templates.
Sorry, just unmuting. We have a very well-populated CBME website, so you can search by topic, role. So it's organized by role, and we've just recently updated that. So you would even be able to go into resources and search, or everything's kind of organized in there. So the tools and resources are isolated for this. You would find them there. We also communicate them and promote them through newsletters and other emails out. And if you're looking for something specific, we can always direct you. We also have Royal College documents listed as well separately. So our own forms, if you see, one thing to note is we've changed the anchors recently this year on the O-score. We've updated them through our implementation committee and some feedback. So they vary slightly from the Royal College, not in any significant way, but in a way that's more helpful in terms of the verbiage. So I just wanted to emphasize that as well. Maybe Allison can share the link from the website into the chat and people can copy it. Thanks, Allison.
So we'll move on to the next part. And this is sort of getting us geared up for our breakout sessions, at which time we're going to drill down a little bit on where you guys are at in your program. And I've listed here some of the prep documents that you would need to get started with this. So the document suite from the Royal College is, essential, but I'm not sure if everyone here, maybe you have draft EPAs or maybe you have fully EPAs that have already been endorsed by the Royal College, but you need a list of your EPAs divided into stages. The other thing that's important is the competencies document, which in CBD, in the CBD stream, this competency document was developed. It's actually the same thing as the objectives of training, the old OTR document. So that's really important. The Royal College is really quite insistent that the competencies be included within any mapping procedure that we put forward. We also need to know, each of us should know what our clinical rotations are and the list of those, and also the non-clinical rotations. And this would vary from one program to the next. I've listed some of the ones that we have, or the ones that I think are particularly prominent that would belong on a map, but no doubt there'll be others, especially in the surgical programs, that may have some different things that need to be taught and assessed. And you should know what your pre-existing assessment tools are. And I hope you're open to developing, adapting some of the newer tools we just heard about in the last presentation, or designing tools on your own. So the Royal College at first was pretty strict with Form 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's how our MedSIS is set up. The MedSIS has also been adapted to allow for other documents to be uploaded, and I think that's good because it allows us to select the tools that are most appropriate to the learning activities we have and the outcomes that we want to achieve. So you need to sort of look at what you've got already, and that's what you should start plugging in, but be open about putting in extra tools. And if you have any old curriculum maps laying around, that's a good thing to look at because it probably lists a lot of the essential activities and the things that you probably want to revamp into a more modernized map. Next slide, please, Allison. So now what I'm going to do, what we've decided, because there are, as I said before, we have many, many maps. We have maps, I've done many maps in internal medicine, accepted many of them, rejected, revamped, accepted again, rejected again. And each program has contributed maps, to, at least to our last workshop. And we found that we probably just had too many maps in general. So what I tried to do for this presentation and for this workshop was to boil it down into 4 maps that I feel are really fundamental, and some version of this should probably be included in your mapping documents. There's no one map that completely handles everything, but 2 of the 4 maps that I'm going to show you are what I would call summary maps, and they do almost handle most things. And you probably need other maps to break it down in more detail. So the first 2 maps are sort of foundational ones, and the last 2 are summary ones. So the first one's called direct mapping. And this is taken from this example from the medical oncology program, as I've used a lot of medical oncology's maps because they're very good. So what the direct mapping means is that you take all of your EPAs divided by stage and then list on the x-axis all of your rotations or your learning activities. And usually with direct mapping, we're just talking about rotations, but it could be other learning activities as well. And then just simply with an X or a check mark or whatever, indicating under which, it just gives you a scattergram, an idea of making sure that every EPA is covered somewhere in your rotations. And this is also very important to take this direct map when you're putting your rotation order together, because you want to make sure that if, for example, an EPA in transition to discipline, which is assessing and managing a patient in the outpatient clinic. In this case, it's great because it's on almost every rotation that's offered. But what if just July and August and September, which is your usual transition to discipline first stage, what if you only had your resident on rotation F? That wouldn't work out. So you have to make sure that during transition to discipline, which is usually the first few months, that the rotations that you offer during those months are going to satisfy that EPA or that collection of EPAs. So it really is a foundational map to allow you to sort of see where everything's at. Doesn't give a lot of detail, but at least allows you to check the boxes and allow you to plan your activities in a way that works for your residents. Any questions about direct mapping? Does anyone here have a direct map already? So you can use the reactions thing or take yourself off mute.
Respirology does.
Good. Okay, excellent. Anyone else?
So does Neo.
Yep, you too. Do you guys find it helpful?
Definitely.
Yeah, it gives a pretty good overview.
Yeah, it's a good overview for sure. Okay, shall we move on to the next map then? So this is called reverse mapping, and it just basically takes it and flips it around. So this time we're focusing on each individual rotation. This is one taken from my program. And so my residents have many selectives. So this is a big deal for any rotations that any programs, I should say, where your residents are going out here, there, hither and thither. So when my residents are on gastroenterology, for example, I want to make sure that I communicate with with gastroenterology, I should say, so that they're on the same page as me in terms of determining which are the target EPAs for that rotation. Which of these ETAs are actually attainable on the rotation? So this was done with a consultation with each individual subspecialty to determine like for transition to discipline, what of my 3 EPAs, could all 3 of them be satisfied on that rotation? And if so, would it be in your inpatient unit or in your clinic? Or, would it be in a non-clinical setting? Are you having retreats or x-ray rounds or whatever to satisfy that? So this is actually, and on the side, you can add on your assessment tools if you want. That could fit in there quite nicely, and we do use that. So the purpose of this is so that the resident actually has a roadmap, and the faculty on gastroenterology have a roadmap so that when my internal medicine residents step foot on a gastroenterology rotation, both the resident and the faculty know what's achievable and what's attainable. My residents know what EPAs they need, they know what they can get, and they can discuss it with the faculty. And the faculty on GI also know what's probably going to be offered and what's needed by my residents. So it's a really good way of making sure that each rotation you have serves a purpose. And also, say I found on this map that gastroenterology could only offer stuff during the core rotation. I would then have to make sure that my residents only hit gastroenterology in the 3rd stage, like somewhere in their 2nd or 3rd year, halfway getting into that once they're through foundation. So it also helps back checking with the other point I was making before about appropriately spacing out your rotations so that the proper EPAs are hit on at the right time. Any questions about reverse mapping? So this reverse map, we have it included in every orientation manual. It's on page 2 of every orientation manual. So when they step on hematology, GI, respirology, infectious disease, wherever it is, CTU, whatever it is, on the 2nd page, we'll have a list of the EPAs that are attainable for that rotation so that they can just open that up and see. Does anyone else use reverse mapping at this point? I found it really helpful. We have a resident development committee, and we've got about 8 members on it representing all 3 years. And what our residents have said mostly is navigation through CBME is the most difficult thing. They don't know where they are. They don't know where they're going. I guess if they sat down and looked at it quite frequently, they would, but they get overwhelmed with everything they have to do. And they need to be told that they have to be aware of their EPAs, how many are signed off, how many more sign-offs do they need, what experiences should they be seeking, where should they be seeking them, looking at their rotation schedule and making sure that it's all attainable in good order and good time. And this helps with that. Any questions with the reverse map? Oh, question, how helpful do you feel reverse mapping is for larger versus smaller programs? I think it's for larger programs, I think it's pretty necessary, especially because larger programs usually go to more visiting sites within our system. I think if you're in a small group, like when I did respirology before, everybody sort of knows what everyone's doing. And the different rotations and different faculty that have different skills and things. So I think it becomes less important in a smaller program, but I think it is still a good roadmap for residents. Some residents are better than others at figuring out things, and others need to be guided. So it may not be essential, but I think it's a very good tool, and it works well with any orientation manual. You guys on smaller programs may not need orientation manuals for every rotation because they're all sort of enclosed within your specialty or subspecialty. But from a rural college point of view, they would be happy to see that, and it would work in nicely with the goals and objectives for any given rotation, which we're supposed to put in CanMed's format as well. So it would sort of blend in with that. You could even throw a little CanMed's column in there if you were happy about it. If you're happy to do that.
And I was just going to say, I think, so we're one of the programs that internal medicine residents sometimes come to, and we asked one internal medicine resident and a medical oncology resident to get together, and we gave them a template for how to create this reverse map. And so they actually did it together as one of their scholarly projects. So I think it's quite possible to ask residents to help, especially those who are interested in potentially education or leadership or academia, to be involved in some of helping to make some of these maps.
Absolutely. And it was a scholarly project I assigned a resident to each one of our 14 selectives. Often they would choose the area that their career destination was set to be or hoping to be. It gave them a good chance to collaborate with senior residents within that subspecialty and with CBD leads, program directors. So, and it also went on their CV and portfolio. So it was pretty much, it was organized by our program at the residency office, facilitated by us, but a lot of the work was carried out by residents, which was great. Okay, Alison, we'll move on to the next. So the last two maps are summary maps. A summary map means that it has almost everything on it that you would need, but in an abbreviated version. And this one here, which came from medical oncology, is called Year at a Glance. And what it is a map that shows what the course of events are over the PGY1 or PGY2 or PGY4 year, whatever year it is, for any given resident. So in smaller programs, when you have maybe only 5 to 10 residents, you can actually have a year at a glance for each individual resident. You can actually put their name there, have the rotations put in the order, and it actually gives them the whole year what they're going to do. Incorporated with that is obviously the blocks at the top, the stage of training that you would anticipate that they're going to be at the time. And of course, that's flexible. And the EPAs that could be achieved or should be achieved that are stated under each stage are listed there. And you can plug in the assessment tools that you're using. And also this one doesn't have it in this map, but the one coming later does. Underneath that, we have competencies from that OTR document. And then other important things like resident meetings with their program director, competence committee meetings, when their exams are, when they have retreats, when their research electives are, the research blocks, all those things can be plugged in, which gives them a really good idea of what they're doing for the year. And it pretty much includes everything the Royal College wants. And I think you just probably need to break it down a little bit more on about this.
I think, yeah, I was just going to make a comment that I think for really, really large programs with potentially hundreds of residents, this is probably not going to be possible to make an individual map for every single resident. But for medical oncology, we only have 8 residents and 4 new ones every year. So for us, it wasn't a lot of extra work to make one up for each resident. And the residents really loved it because they can see where they're at and what's coming, and also when their exams are, when they should meet with their academic coach. There's all kinds of things built in for that whole year. So they really liked it.
And what we've done in our program where we have 38 to 40 in each year, residents in each year, is I have a PGY1 roadmap for PGY1s. And obviously I can't plug in the rotations because everyone's on a slightly different schedule. But I can certainly put all the other activities in to give them an idea of when important things are. They're really concerned about when the coach meeting is and when the competence committee meeting is, because they sort of like to know when that competence committee meeting is, because they know that if it's one of those critical meetings where there's going to be assessed as to whether or not they can be advanced to the next stage, they want to make sure they've got their EPA signed off, they've got their reflection document done ready for the coach. So there's certain things on it, even though we can't put an individual schedule, rotational schedule for everyone there, it still has value and the residents really like it.
I'm curious, Smita, if you have a comment there about potentially the role of the resident leads playing a hand in organizing to have this developed with residents as well and have them adopt as a tool for understanding their pathway? Or is this just more program leadership?
Yeah, but there are certain things that we have been trying in our program is that it's 2 of us who are the resident leads, but we are trying to have some time in our academic half days where we are trying to get some resident interactions about these. So we haven't yet planned when it is, but it is sometime in mid-February. That's what our intended goals are, so that we can also have our kind of presentations up to date, and we are all aware ourselves so that we can help the residents troubleshoot.
Very good. Thank you.
And there was also a comment made about including PAs, and I think Lisa, Allison, and Shom and I talked about that at one of our meetings. So I'm glad to see there are some PAs here today, because I know Jan, who's my PA, she was, especially when we started this process, was instrumental in getting things going. And you guys are the backbone of the program and running things. So I think it's really important that the maps make sense to you guys. So I'm really glad to see the participation there. Next slide, please. Excellent. So this is the last of the 4 maps. It's another summary map, and it's very similar to the last one, only it's called CBD stage at a glance. So it basically looked at all of the things that we saw on a year at a glance, formatted differently, but more importantly, looking at it by stage. So this is my own residence, and this is foundations of discipline stage. And again, this was adapted from medical oncology, who had a very similar table. It's almost lifted almost completely, and I just filled in my stuff. So I would have the block rotations there. And then other training experiences, there's nothing there, but if we were later, we'll scroll down and you can see that's where you have our retreats, our workshops, and the other experiences that are very important part of learning that aren't actual block rotations, some of them longitudinal, some of them sessional. And then linked EPA. So the EPA that's linked to that activity or to that rotation is listed here. Candidates roles that are most highly represented within that block rotation by those activities are listed there, along with the CanMed's enabling competencies. So this is where the competency document has come in. And importantly, today we're talking about assessment tools. So we've got that included as well, so for orientation boot camp, for example, Form 2, because we do a lot of procedural simulation stuff. So that's why that's included, and attendance. We don't take attendance for all of our non-clinical activities, but ones that is important as boot camp and some of our sim events, we do take attendance. Whereas CTU block, which is the next thing on the list, we have mostly Form 1, Form 2, an ITER, and a multi-source feedback. And you can see there's a lot of enabling competencies there. So you can see that everything is actually on these 2 documents one way or another. And the stumbling block has been the Royal College has insisted that the enabling competencies are shoved into the curriculum maps. But if you look at that document, it's really quite a monster. And if you look at it, what they sort of wanted us to do originally was to take every competency, and there's 1.1.1, 1.1.1.2, you can imagine, you can see there, and to take every one and then say where that could be accomplished and what tool you would use. And it just was a very not user-friendly and not helpful at all. This, on the other hand, is very helpful. And I think if the Royal College saw either the previous map year at a glance or the CBD stage at a glance, and if that's all you had, I think you would pass your accreditation, because I know that it meets the standards. I also think that it's not so cluttered that it actually has a valid role, or it's very useful for the stakeholders. So this form, for example, would be great for residents to see where they're at. It would be, of course, the program director and the residency office, the PAs would love it, and the accreditors would love it as well. So I think it's simple and it's easy, but I think it's a good place to start. And so that's why we've chosen these 4 out of the probably 10 or 12 maps we've had between the 2 of us, with extra help from ENT, anesthesia, ICU, and other programs that have put it in. We've sort of picked and choosed and looked at the things we feel are most fundamental and important. So any question about this map or any of the others, other 3 that we've presented? And any questions or comments? This is what we're going to try to get you started. For those of you who haven't got started, this is what I think, this is where we recommend that you start. A good starting point for you is these 4 maps, maybe just 1 today, 1 or 2. For those of you that are already well in the process, we'll be happy to look at what you have, either at the breakout session today or independently on a side session that we would be happy to have with you to have a look at. So any comments or questions?
Just one comment that I have, Lori. In terms of mapping, I found that it was also very helpful for me as a PG, but also for the program to have my program admin be really involved in this. It was also at a time that I had a new program admin, so it's a really good way of getting very intimate with the program and understanding its ins and outs. So I would just throw it out and say, consider using your PA's expertise and support during this time, as well as a way to kind of engage PAs in understanding, the runnings of the program.
Right. No, it's a two-way highway. That's right. Information highway back and forth. So absolutely. I know when we started with curriculum mapping about 3 years ago, I sat down, there's myself, my PA, and one of the deputy program directors. And we thought we would be able to really make headway in 2 hours. Well, I think it was 3 or 4 half-day meetings later when we finally decided where we should start and how to get things going. But through that time, I think we all three of us had a better understanding of the direction we wanted the program to go to, and how CBME was going to change things, how the transition to CBME is best understood when you start having those vital interactions, communications between the program office of PA and the program director. So I totally agree with you there. Okay, so I think at this point we were going to look at either having a break or perhaps if Andrea came, we were maybe going to have a look at her maps. I don't think Andrea's here, is she? Because she was on service and didn't know if she was going to make it. So, okay, well, why don't we just adjourn for 5 minutes and then we'll come back and we'll go into our breakout rooms and take it from there.
So I think everybody's come back into the room. Okay, enjoy it, everybody.
Oh, thanks. We'll see everybody in a bit.
Hi, did everyone make it back?
Yes, we're all back.
Yep, we're all here now.
Okay. It says I'm muted, but it says I'm not. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I'm getting 2 conflicting messages there. So, excellent. Thanks, Allison. So putting it all together, just sort of as a summary, starting at the bottom of this pyramid and working up, we look at all of our activities, including our rotations and other learning activities. Have our EPAs in front of us, for those of us who have them. Start with a couple of foundational maps, which, as I said, we think the direct map and the reverse map are probably the best for our programs, at least for Shulman, I feel that. And then to get into your competencies document, which is anywhere between about 15 to 40 pages. But it by CanMeds, it divides the different competencies into the different CanMeds roles, break it down, and then you sort of want to align that up. In the meantime, gather the assessment tools that you found most helpful and be open to some new ones that you feel would bring a different dimension to your assessment portfolios for your patients. And then organize all of the above into some sort of summary map that makes sense to you and that satisfies the accreditation standards. So in order to do that, you would have to have both the competencies in there and the assessment tools linked with all of your activities, hopefully in CanMeds with some sort of CanMeds acknowledgement. And then from there, you've got probably everything that you need. Now, I understand the surgical programs may have a little bit more of they may have to take a different approach because of the fact that they're so procedural based. And some of the specialties, like what we saw with ENT maps, is their rotations that they have and their EPAs are very focused on the various surgical procedures. So they may have to have anyone that's surgical and it breaks things down that finally may probably want to look at the maps from some of the surgical specialties like ENT. So what's going to be available to you, not only this session here, which is being recorded, the PowerPoint slides and the maps that are filled and unfilled will be available to you, but there'll be, and the toolkit that Dr. Mukherjee presented, which shows the current tools that we have at our disposal that we're using most often. It's not all of them, but most often. That will be available to you. And as well, there'll be another workbook that has like one that has just these 4 maps and we talked about today, but there'd be like an accessory or an additional workbook that has the ones that we looked at the last workshop, including anesthesia's map, because they're a bit different as well, and ENT, and some of the other backup maps that I use in my program. So those were the tools that you'll have to sort of decide what's best for your program and to put it together. I guess the other tool would be just kind of, if you need to contact any of us, we're happy to help you, or to have a look at a map that you're doing, or if you get hung up on an area, we're happy to take emails and calls individually. Can we have the next slide, please, Allison? Is it frozen?
I think Dr. Whitehead might be frozen.
Is it me that's frozen?
Oh, I think, okay, you're back.
Oh, sorry. Yes, it is
Maybe
me.
it was me.
No, I think it was me because I'm
We
having.
can hear you though, Lori. We can hear you.
Okay. Next slide then, please.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. Frozen again. Shom, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think we can all hear you. We just can't see you.
Okay.
Mm.
Well, there wasn't much anyway. It was just, I was going back to that 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3 thing, and just wanted to indicate for us to look at things both sides to make sure that we've covered all the objectives we need to do with mapping. And that was all that basically I wanted to say. I had one slide for that. And then it was just sort of a Q&A or any comments. I think in the breakout groups, I guess we could talk a little bit about what happened in breakout as well. So I can talk about our breakout, or somebody from the group can summarize what we learned. I'm happy to do it, but don't want to put anyone on the spot.
Go for it, Lori.
Okay, so in general, we found that most people in our group had already made excellent inroads and progress on their curriculum mapping. And that I think they have learned some things today, I hope, that would help them come up with summary maps and to organize things a little bit. So I think that already they've done a tremendous amount of work, and it sounds as if they're very familiar with all the concepts. And I have full confidence that their maps are going to be entirely suitable and useful for their program once they add a little bit more on. So that's good. And Irina, you had a suggestion about a software I think you should share with the group. Maybe she's had to go.
I think
Maybe
Dr.
I'll just-
Basilius sent it to us in the chat. It is Airtable, right?
Yeah.
Said now that open table is no fun, we can make up for it with Airtable. It costs money though, right? And that's what she said. I don't know.
Oh, sorry, my internet just dropped me off. It doesn't cost very much, but you can try out like the basic version for free. We found that we quickly wanted to go to the more expanded version, and I think it costs about $100 a year. It's nothing too expensive. If
Do you
people
use it for just education already, or is it in your division as well?
You know what? We just use it for education, but I'm pretty sure that there's multiple uses for it if you wanted to use it for other divisional things. It looks like Kelly, you use it as well?
I do. I've been using it for a few years now, actually. Gani actually sort of put together a huge, massive interactive curriculum map, and we're looking at adding our assessment tools to it now. I've been using it for all of my program finance, and I use it for our academic half day and all of our other teaching and education as well. And just using the free version.
Excellent. So I'm going to summarize some of the learning experiences and what happened in your group, your breakout.
Yeah, sure. I can do that if you like. So it was just very similar. I think our group was also very far along. They all had curriculum maps already in place. And I think some of the curriculum maps we presented were new to them, at least 1 or 2. So they were going to think about incorporating that into their program. But yeah, people have definitely thought about curriculum maps in our group. And we sort of went through the examples, the templates, and just talked about where they might fit into each program. So that, yeah, that's basically it.
Well, that's very impressive. That's good. I'm still frozen on the screen as long as you guys can hear me. That should be okay. Any final questions or comments? We're actually a little ahead of schedule, but that's good.
I have a question, if that's okay, Lori. It came up in our group about what are the things that we really need to show on the curriculum map versus what are the things that is nice to have in terms of if someone wants to like do what is really required, given that we're going to launch CBME in July. So that was a question in our group, and that makes me think, so a question to you and to Sam as well, what are the things that we must have on the curriculum map? So my understanding is that we really need to have the CAN-MEDS objectives. We need to have the training experiences to make sure that it covers all the CAN-MEDS objectives. And we need to map all the different assessments that will assess the training experience and also the CAN-MEDS objectives. Is that like the minimum requirement for the curriculum map?
That would be, yeah, and that would be the competencies, which would be the same as what you said, the objectives. So those are the main things that you need. And if you go back to the map that the Royal College sent us, the template, those are the elements on it. And they have actually said, you don't have to use this map, which everyone goes, great, that's great. But they said, but everything on it has to be included somewhere. So it's like, oh, okay. But those are the things that you've stated, the training experience, the assessment tools should be listed in CAN-MEDS format, and the competencies all linked in. That would be those are the essential components of the map.
Lori, do you know, is the CAN-MEDS specific breakdown of the medical expert communicator, do they require that level of detail in that curriculum map?
Yes, because the competency document itself is broken down into the 7 CAN-MEDS roles.
Right.
So they've got it in there.
Right, because I think the other things are just helpful to have as a curriculum map in general, but that would be the extra thing, that extra level of detail, I guess needs to be in those maps as well.
Any other questions or comments? Really appreciate your attention, especially on a Friday afternoon, which is often a busy time when you're on service or trying to wrap up things for the week. I think we did a poll and just determined that for this week, this was the best time. So we appreciate you coming. And I think I'm really impressed at how far along you guys are. I wonder if the people that didn't sign up have started. I mean, it's great to know that you've made excellent progress. I just not sure. Do you guys have some of your companion programs or programs that are similar to yours, or PAs that know other PAs or whatever? Do you think other programs who are ready to roll out are well on their way with curriculum mapping? Any comments about that might help us with our future planning?
I would just add, Lori, I'm entertaining a survey now for the 2021 programs to identify what their transition needs are. FacDev being part, and other pieces that we need to help. COVID's playing a hand. People are busy. It's stressed, and so hopefully that will inform how we address some of those priorities. So one of those pieces can be about your curriculum mapping. And just before we started, I had mentioned to Sam about having potentially a drop-in hour or two in follow-up to this, so we can put this recording out to programs and then maybe schedule a drop-in, so people that are working on their curriculum maps can send prior for your input, and then we can have a drop-in session where people can just get some feedback and talk about some of their the issues as they finalize them, if that's reasonable for you too.
I think it's a good question that you raised, Lori, right? In terms of who's attending. Is it the people that are already doing it and just kind of want to upskill, or is it the people who haven't? And I would say that in PEDS, and I'm happy for others to chime in, that probably of the people who have already launched or about to launch, I'd say maybe about 50% have really kind of made a headway into the curriculum mapping and assessment mapping, but I think there's definitely room for support. I think there's just so much to do, and the last year hasn't been very kind. So a bit of catch up time would be very valued if COVID can give everybody a bit of a break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is definitely has set things back at the Royal College as well. Their timetable of their activities for not just the CBD rollout programs and that sort of thing, but all the other things they do at the Royal College, they're really struggling as well. So yeah, everything's slowed down a bit, which is difficult because, programs thought they were going to be able to roll out and now they can't. Just the preoccupation with the pandemic has really been devastating, really, in many ways. But I think having said that, I'm again very impressed with how McMaster and especially Lisa and your team, Allison, and Parveen have kept the machine rolling. The educational workshops, the communications on the webpage, the emails and things, how you pass on vital stuff from the Royal College. I think that despite COVID, you have been providing enough prompts and opportunities for program directors, PAs, residents, whatever, to get on top of this and to keep the machine rolling. Although, albeit slowed down a bit, it has been rolling and it hasn't been forgotten. So I'm very appreciative of that. And I'm sure the others are as well.
Thanks, Lori. We're actually, Irene and I are just having some conversations with Parveen too about different strategies that we can use to reach some of those needs as programs move into the busy last 6 months prior to transition. And so the survey I spoke of will help inform that. But I think finding different ways and certainly, exploiting what Zoom offers us in terms of breakout rooms and ability to get together efficiently is really helpful. But like Ines and others, program directors, I hope to hear from you about, where are you at? What do you need? Some things will translate into FacDev. Others will do some town halls and have some mentor panels available as you're moving through things. And I agree with Irene's suggestion to kind of look at where our workshops are at and what we can actually expect from busy PDs and PAs, but we'll find creative ways to engage and support. There's lots of resources, and Sam and Lori really do represent the number of champions that have preceded you, and their willingness to share and do all this work has just been tremendous. So back at you, Lori and Sam, in terms of the recognition. It's been great.
I should have mentioned Irene, because you're like at every single, you're organizing every single session and overseeing it and making sure it's coordinated with the curriculum coming out of the CBME MAC. So yeah, you're really fantastic. I think you're a big part of the whole movement. So
yeah,
I'm a small part in a team that's very excellent, and that team includes our PGs and our PAs for sure. I would just say that with everything that's going on, it's facilitators like Shom and Lori that really keep the spirit going and keep people motivated and are so selfless in sharing their expertise and their resources, and for being available even between workshops and after workshops. And what we're secretly, not so secretly hoping to do is to inspire everybody who comes to our workshops to become faculty developers. So if you have A, ideas, B, needs, but C, also want to become part of our core working groups for any of the workshops or have ideas for new workshops, do know that Lisa, myself, and Allison are always looking and are always open. Let us know what you're interested in and we'll get you in there. We just really want to create capacity and create communities of practice and really make sure that we've got everybody as a faculty developer and not just a select few, because that's not at all the model that we're aiming for.
You will see a list of CBD champions on our website. So there are people that have stepped forward to be contacted around certain areas. So that's another resource for you. And I'm excited to mention that we are moving forward with our online learning strategy, developing a platform for anytime 24/7 learning. So we hope to move these, plan to move these workshops into a self-directed, accredited module approach and supplement them with these kinds of great webinars. So we do have still more things in the works.
Yeah, and I think that the message within the message for faculty development, at least for me, to come to enough of these, that it is so important to hear the same message over and over again with this stuff, because it since the very beginning of hearing about this, it's always had this feeling of being quite intuitive and fitting with some of our old models of education. And yet that kind of flips your brain and saying, yeah, I've got it. That's good. And then you start digging into it and you realize it isn't until the 7th time I've heard these things that I finally go, oh my gosh, that's what it's for.
Yeah.
So,
You gotta throw the
Adam,
noodle.
you're a quick learner, my friend. I think it took me like 15 times. So you're twice as fast as I am.
no,
Yeah.
it's just surprising. And just to think of when we're doing the fact of stuff that Irene is leading us with, just to recognize that it's not the first, second, or third time that you say it that's going to be a lock.
Oh, Adam, you're talking about the PED specific stuff. Yeah, I think we've got to realize that we're very invested in faculty development, but that's not all the faculty that we work with. Everybody has their own areas of niches, but everybody supervises residents. So I think the challenge for you that I would put out there is, how do you make everybody, or how do you empower everybody around you, all the faculty, whether they're educators or not, to almost be their own little mini faculty developers, right? That they're taking that message forward and kind of preaching it. If you have any magic solutions, let me know. But I think both the literature and lived experiences, Lori, you will attest to that. It's a matter of time and plugging away at it. And like Adam saying, like just repeating the message over and over again. And so we don't want to sound like a broken record. Thank you to everybody. It's 4:52. If there are no other questions, maybe we can get a head start on our weekend. And if anybody has children like me under the age of 10 who are learning from home, we can go see what they've learned or not learned, and we have to catch up on over the weekend.
I'm more concerned about your birds going quiet.
Oh, I moved rooms, but
it's cold outside, Rainy.
I'll keep you updated at the next workshop. If you come to the next workshop, I promise to give you an update as to whether or not the birds are still alive.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.